I can see attendees are coming. Welcome. My name is Reginald Ponder. I'm with the Kaleidoscope Group, and we will be getting started shortly. Really excited that you would spend some time with us. We're going to give the attendees, all the attendees, a chance to come in. So we'll start in about a minute or so. But while you're waiting, let's look and see where you're located. I'm located in Chicago. And my colleagues are located in different places as well, but it'd be great if you put in the chat where you're located to get a sense for that. Oh, I have Nathaniel from Chicago. Hey, at least we got some Chicago people. Hello from Pittsburgh. It's Jessica. Denver, Charlotte. Oh, that's Mitch. Mitch, we know you're in Charlotte. Neil in Boston. We have Melanie in Chicago. We have some more Chicago people. We have someone in Springfield, Illinois. New York City. All right, people are coming in. Okay. We have someone from London. Angie Price from London is checking in. Thanks for that, Angie. Got Gerald from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. We see California there as well. Riverside, Illinois, that's really close to where I am. Say howdy neighbor Lisa. I am really close to Riverside, so yeah, absolutely. Pittsburgh, San Jose. Again, I'm gonna wait just one more minute and then we'll delve in and get started. We know your time is valuable. Again, we really appreciate the fact that you decide to spend some time with us. So thank you. I'm going to look at a couple more folks here. Got Tracy in Canada, in Ottawa, Canada. We have Milwaukee. You might as well just say Chicago. Naples, San Diego, Washington, some more Charlotte. Oh, we have Jessica in Charlotte. So Mitch is there, and Lindsay said we will be right. I see what you said there, Lindsay, Omaha. And let's see. All right, I'm actually going to get us started. We're 3 minutes in. Everybody else will have to catch up. Appreciate again that you, wherever you hail from, that you put it in the chat. Thanks so much. And if you have questions throughout, make sure to put them in the chat. We will try to answer them. If we don't answer them during this session, what we'll do is someone will get back to you with an answer. So again, real excited that you are here. So the title of this, almost like they do when you're on an airplane, they say, if you're not going to Denver, then you're in the wrong place. The title of this is Building a Leadership Culture with DEI, a Formula for Success. Again, my name is Reginald Ponder. I will be the moderator for this session. And then we have Mitch Brown, who is the Senior Consultant and Engagement Leader. Mitch, please say hello.
Hi, everybody. Mitch Brown here, Senior Consultant Engagement Leader. It's a pleasure to be with you. And I'm just excited about leading this conversation about leadership and diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And then we have Lindsay Chardelli, a Senior Business Development Lead. Lindsay, please say hello as well.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. If you're looking forward to furthering the conversation, always feel free to reach out to me directly and I'll get you taken care of. Thanks so much. Looking forward to the conversation.
Well, with that, I think our first thing is really looking at a poll. And Lindsay will be taking us through all of our polls. And Mitch, if you can move to, go ahead, Lindsay.
All righty. So everyone, please tell us what would best describe why you are here today. Looking for an overview of how DEI and leadership relate to each other. Your organization has a strong focus on developing leaders. Your organization's DEI efforts seem to be garnering diminishing effort returns, and then all of the above and more. Let us know your thoughts here.
And Lindsay, last time we did this, I thought you were going to do the Jeopardy song, which is dun dun, but we don't have the rights to that. So are you going to sing something so that we can, while we wait for all these responses to come in? I don't think so. But anyway, we have 46 out of 60. We'd love to get above 80%. So come on, you stragglers.
Looks like we've got 78% participation. Let's get a couple more responses in here.
Yes, we made it to 80.
Made it. All righty. 81% actually, Reg. So we're going to end this poll. All righty. So it looks like 36% are looking for an overview, 26% strong focus on developing leaders, 6% efforts seem to be garnering diminishing returns, and then all of the above at 32%. Team, any thoughts on these results?
I think, and I know Mitch will chime in. I think what you'll hear today, with our focus on leadership, we will be talking about leadership in general, but I think that what we will be covering will also cover some of the other areas in which you are concerned about. And if we don't, again, cover some of those other things, just make sure, just put it in the chat. Lindsay will absolutely get back to you regarding some of your concerns and things of that nature. So with that, I'd like to just tell you a little bit about the Kaleidoscope Group. Won't spend a lot of time here, but we are a full service diversity, equity, inclusion company. We're based in Chicago, yay. We're certified minority-owned business led by fearless leader, Doug Harris. We've assisted many organizations over time, and we've been in business for over 30 years. And then when I talk about the different clients, over 800 clients and growing every day that we help with whatever their issues are. And a lot of times when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, a lot of times people just think that they're racial issues, and this spans the whole gamut, more than just the racial issues. Additionally, our company has about 40 staff, 25 associates. We are global, so we have international facilitators and consultants, and this is a specialty niche practice. So I want to tell you just a bit about what we believe is our advantage. And when we look at our difference here, is that from a flexibility standpoint, we're flexible. We know that being in this business for over 30 years, that everybody's situation, even though it might be similar, there are some nuances to it. And there are nuances in every company with every situation. So we're flexible and don't provide a cookie cutter approach. And then from a partnerships perspective, we actually work with you. We know no one knows your business better than you. We know what we do. And so when you combine that together, then we should be able to work in partnership to deliver results, because the results are really, at the end of the day, what you're looking for. Does this make my company better? And then finally, from a sustainability perspective, one of the things is just to make sure that this is not a kind of a one and done solution when we come in and try to work with you. That how do you sustain this over time? Many companies do starts and stops, or they'll start and can't sustain it. And so we work with that. And then just from a capability perspective, and I spoke to that a little bit, we are global. We address many different issues as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that tells you a little bit about us, but that's it on our spiel about us. Let's get into the presentation a little bit more. Again, there's Lindsay. Hey, Lindsay.
Hey, everyone.
There's Mitch, and Mitch is up in a second, and myself. So Mitch, let's delve into the presentation a little bit. Today's agenda, when we look at this agenda, exactly what we're going to cover is how DEI skills help build and sustain cultures of leaders and leadership. We'll talk about managers versus leadership. And you know, Mitch, I always like to talk about that because we talk about some of that offline. And then we will also talk about developing a leadership culture. So Mitch, what is it that you are hoping that people take away from this?
Yeah, so I mean, listen, first and foremost, thanks to everybody who showed up today. 71 of you, your attentiveness and your engagement is definitely, we're so happy to have you. But I think at the end of this conversation, Reggie, we just want to explore at a high level the cause and effect relationship between D&I and leadership. What we find is a lot of times that, there could be a lot of opportunities to make some complementary efforts with those things. And when I look at why people are here, and that a lot of your organizations are really interested in developing leaders. And that's what we're finding in the marketplace right now. What people seem to be remiss not to notice is that there is a correlation between diversity, equity, inclusion, skills and behaviors, and leadership. And then, how does that all feed into this overall idea of inclusive culture? So hopefully by the end of today's conversation, we've given some insight and some overview on that.
Well, that's great. So when we get into this first section, and we'll have a lot to talk about when we get into this first section, it's really about DEI skills build leadership culture. DEI skills build leadership culture. And Mitch, this is, you just talked about it just a bit about how you have leadership, but this whole thing about DEI absolutely helps in that whole quest for real good leaders.
Yeah. So, Reggie, one of the things we wanted to talk about here today, first and foremost, is the idea of inclusivity, right? And, that the idea of culture that is inclusive, and how does that beget great leaders? Well, before you is something that we talk about from a philosophy standpoint as our core competencies around inclusive behavior, around inclusive environments. It is the ability to embrace difference. It's the ability to act courageously when needed, right? It's the ability to communicate authentically or have a respectful and inclusive communication elements of that culture. It's your ability to demonstrate empathy. And lastly, it's your ability to manage privilege. And these things we talk about, Reggie, from a inclusivity standpoint. But if you just look through the lens of leadership and you look at these competencies, surely the crowd can, see that, these things are super relevant. So, we thought we spent a little time going through these competencies, Reggie, and talking about maybe that connection, again, that correlation to how these competencies help drive, leadership competencies. So the ability to embrace difference, let's start there.
Yeah, I like that, and particularly I like it just as it relates to our discussion about leadership. A lot of times when we look at embracing differences, you'll be like, well, what does that have to do with me being a good leader?
Well, the workplace is ever becoming more diverse. It's more diverse that it is today than it was in yesteryear. And one of the things that we are finding out in the marketplace that is a continuous challenge is how do you take this more diverse workplace and make sure that you're leading people in a very collaborative and effective way. And what we find is in our philosophy, Reggie, you've heard us, maybe if you joined us before on some of these webcasts, that inclusion is not circumstantial. It's a byproduct of what we intend to do. It's a byproduct of our proactive approaches. And, there are many different ways that we think about diversity in today's world. It's not only about race, ethnicity, gender identity, those kind of things, but it's all, maybe style, and style nuances and how those things can, impact how we evaluate others, how we coach others, how we develop others. This is one competency that I think, when it comes to leadership, it really behooves leaders to really understand and really develop and hone the skill of being able to embrace difference.
What I find, Mitch, as we talk about embracing differences, is that our multinational companies are actually forced to have to figure that out because of the difference that's happening in the different countries that they're in, the different audiences that they serve.
Yeah, I mean, you can have that application, Reggie. It's many different applications. I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who leads a monolithic group in everything from their personalities to their communication styles to even their we live in a remote workplace now, so that right there in itself is something that really would again behoove leaders to understand how to make the most a very diverse composition of individuals. So, we do a little deep dive on that around embracing difference, have some core things that we try to develop leaders on. But that would be that first competency.
I like that. Thanks so much.
The second one would be courageous action. And, leaders are oftentimes have the form And
Hey,
the
Mitch, before you go there, we have a comment. Claudia is making a comment in the chat, saying that she appreciates the fact that you started with embracing differences, especially since it allows employees to show up fully and increase engagement. It's a stepping stone to creating psychological safety.
Thank you, Claudia. Definitely. I think that is psychological safety is another thing that's highly important to really, create and protect, in your role as a leader.
I just didn't want to miss that. I thought that was a good comment. Mitch.
So I think the courageous action piece, again, we talk about that from the idea of we want leaders to be courageous and definitely be courageous in the aspect of, driving inclusion, equity, and to be at the forefront of that, right? To really be champions and to stand up for others who, traditionally are not in a position to stand up for themselves, especially when others are at the, other end of exclusion, a disconnect, or some kind of inequity.
And is acting a lot of times when we say acting courageously, that just the statement being courageous is scary for a lot of people. Can you speak to that a little bit, Mitch?
Well, courage is very it's an idea or a concept that's not necessarily foreign to people. I think people, have understand courage from a concept standpoint, but the application of courage, right, and the opportunity to be courageous is something that we dig a little deeper on. And I think courage, shows up in very different ways. There are different ways for us to be courageous and different opportunities and needs for, courage. And I think what leaders have to understand and what we coach around is that, for us to really, we talk about this a little bit in privilege, for us to really make the most, right, of our uniquely situated positions. We're, our courage and courageous acts can, really drive the interests of inclusion and really, protect the interests of equity in ways as leaders that maybe other stakeholders in our organization can't. And likewise, honestly, Reggie, when you think about great leaders and leaders that you might be like, right, you can maybe point to them and point to occasions of where they've, maybe, stood up to the, whatever, opposition there was, but they've taken that opportunity to really demonstrate and model courage and inclusion in ways that others would, appreciate, right? That it really means something to them and does something for them. So I think courageous action in a way, if you're talking about leadership development, not only does it require to, again, make sure that you have these like kind of inclusive environments, but it allows you to, again, your credibility as a leader is really attached to this idea of courageous action as well.
Yeah, Lindsay, I see you had a question. Come on.
Yeah, we got the chat blowing up right now. So we have a good question around acting courageously. So would being an ally be considered a courageous attribute, or would that fall somewhere else in these competencies?
Good question. So these are our core competencies. So there are a lot of other things we talk about, like allyship or like bias. And just in short, allyship is really about modeling inclusion. We talk about allyship and we talk a lot about privilege. And then we talk a lot about advocacy in our allyship programming. Now, certainly, allies are taking a stand on exclusion and working on the behalf and support of excluded and, aggrieved parties. So is there some courage needed in that? For sure. But, when you get into our allyship programming, we focus on modeling inclusion, which is, again, could lead to some talk around courage, managing privilege, and advocacy.
Thank you, Mitch. Very helpful.
And this thing, the next one, Mitch, is communicating authentically. And sometimes I think people get that confused with just saying whatever you want to say.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with a client the other day, and one of the things is like, hey, we want people to have an unfiltered voice, right? And sometimes when people say that, it's like, does that mean we neglect the idea of respect? So you see in this definition around communicating authentically, it's embrace and share respectful truth across lines of difference. And arguably, sometimes we communicate better via sameness. Again, these things are interrelated when you're talking about embracing difference. That's another piece is like, how do you do this well across lines of difference and diversity? But communicating authentically, Reggie, I like to sum it up for people as this. You're talking about inclusive and respectful communication. And the key thing about communication is, you ever heard somebody say, hey, I spoke to you. You didn't speak to me back, right? Well, that is a situation, right? It's two-way. I said something, you didn't say anything back. Or sometimes people say, well, why didn't you speak to me? And it's like, well, you didn't speak to me either, right? So sometimes we miss in communication that it's often about what we do as a messenger, and not sometimes about what we do as a recipient. So, this, from a leadership perspective, is super important, because we'll talk about here a little later in this conversation about, other dynamics that are related to leadership. But, we often as leaders, we can have the position of being an authoritarian. But you've all heard these cliches, right? The best leaders are good followers, or they're good listeners, right? So you have to really be somebody who, works on this particular competency and skill to develop your leadership qualities, right? And you got to communicate authentically, or simply put, be a person who's more about, inclusive and respectful communication.
And I really love that you talk about the respectful communication, because Doug talks about frequently this whole issue of brutal truth, is that people will tell you the brutal truth, but anything brutal is not productive. It's like, that doesn't mean that you don't tell them the truth, but when you tell them the truth, you tell it to someone respectfully. And I just like that concept.
Good leaders, good coaches, people in these kind of positions understand their audience. And you show some deference to the understanding and knowledge you have of people. So good leaders are people persons. You know what I mean? Like, good leaders sometimes in organizations are leaders because maybe what they show, technically. We'll talk about that here today. But this is one of those specific pieces, Reggie, where you think about it. A good leader is somebody who's going to know their audience. And when it comes to communication specifically, respect is subjective. So I understand how to get a message across, how to persuade and compel, all while understanding the recipient of that message, right? And I'm not just doing it from the standpoint of, hey, I'm the leader, you need to listen to me, or I could tell you and talk to you any kind of way I want to.
Yeah, I like that. I like another thing I just want to punctuate that you spoke about, is that you will have to speak to people differently. And that goes back to this whole thing of embracing differences. I'm not talking about coddling people, but using the same style for every situation is just not the productive way to move about.
It's not. And this piece, I want to make sure we're clear, is very key, because up under this banner of this competency, again, each of these competencies, we do some deep dives around behavior, skills, and tactics. Feedback falls here, Reggie. And feedback is an essential catalyst for growth. So it's critical, it's essential. But you oftentimes don't just need to give feedback for the sake of being critical, but you need to do it in the interest of you being better, the other person being better, and the organization being better for it.
I love that. Lindsay, I see you got something.
Yeah, this is such an important dialogue, and really based around the concept of having difficult conversations that are going to help to improve teams and move people to a place of true unity. So we have an awesome question from David in the chat around embracing differences. So how can a leader intentionally embrace differences in a political ideologies and affiliations, which are the cause of so much tension in the world today, and creep into the workplace? So how do you be skillful and graceful around that?
Yeah, it's a really deep and complex question. So I appreciate that, David. I think one of the things I tell people to do is, it's not a blanket statement to say we can't have a perspective or point of view on the world and our values and our behaviors. Oftentimes, Lindsay, to address a question like that, I often ask clients and say, point back to your organization values or your DEI mission statement. That gives you something to anchor on, right? So when we talk about how do we evaluate or be inclusive of certain ideologies that may be divisive in nature? Well, some things that go against the core value of who you are as an organization or what you're trying to do from a D&I perspective, I think that leads you to, again, the things that you can maybe embrace, or the things that you can kind of, again, show gratitude and appreciation for, people's differences, but really establish, when we talk about being welcoming to all, it's from a very positive place, right? And it's not, we're welcoming to everything and somebody's ideology, somebody's point of view or perspective is counter to the idea of our mission statement. It's counter to the idea of our values. So, I coach, David, clients on navigating those kind of situations by, making sure and being proud that you can anchor to your values and your mission statements, right? And that's why those things are so important. When you all talk to Lindsay more often, if you're getting started, that's one of the reasons we start with things like a vision of success, or we start with things like really getting your arms fundamentally around, well, what do we even mean by diversity and inclusion? Because that, to me, helps, again, deal with those type of situations.
That's good. Let's get through. Let's go. I'm saying let's get through, but let's see if we can cover these other two, because we do have some other
the
material.
last two competencies, and as you can all see, right, these are deep things, right? So, we wanted to show them as an overview, but, honestly, when people come to us and say, hey, let's work on the skills and behaviors of my leaders and these things, there's a lot of deep conversation and layers to these things. But the next one, Reggie, is a leader's ability to demonstrate empathy. How do you seek to understand and honor others' experience and perspectives? You see those first two action items in that definition: seek and understand and honor. That's so important. As a leader, one of the things you need to do is, first of all, is expand your thoughts. And what we mean by that is, how do you see the world beyond a perspective and experience of your own? Now, Reggie, if you're leading a team of very diverse individuals, that's super important, especially if you're going to be embracing difference. And then, how do you understand that difference? By honoring those other experiences and perspectives. So honor, to me, analogous words are like recognize and reward and make me be seen, right? So that goes a step further in being consistent with that idea of being proactive and intentional around, again, how we can make others feel comfortable and how we can make others feel seen.
Yeah, that's great. And then the last one, you touched on it just a little bit, Mitch, managing privilege. And this is a webinar in and of itself to talk about managing privilege, but speak to it as it relates to leadership.
Yeah, in summation, it's about understanding your uniquely situated positions and what makes your position uniquely situated. Maybe it's a forum, quite certainly, maybe it's a platform, maybe it's a certain authority or positional power that you have. And it's about assessing that and understanding where can you create fairness and equities for others. Fairness and equity for others based upon that uniquely situated position. Leaders have a obligation, they're working in the interest of D&I to do that. But quite frankly, sometimes leaders do that. And again, part of today's conversation is leadership isn't necessarily always about coining something as diversity, equity, inclusion. Good leaders do that regardless of how they coin it, right? You're a person who is working in the interest of fairness. That's a good person. That's a good leader.
I love that. I want to get into talking about managing privilege a little bit more, but I won't. I'll save that for another time. Let's, Lindsay, I think we have another poll coming up.
Yes. All righty, team. So our next poll here is about evaluating leaders. I'm going to launch this here. So tell us about your organization and how they evaluate leadership based on these competencies, some others, or are you unclear about what competencies leaders are evaluated on today? Again, we want to get at least 80% participation here, so please click a button for us. We got 52, 55, 56%.
We're getting there. We're at 60-something%.
We're climbing. Here we go. We got 65%. 72%. Let's get a couple more in here. Almost there.
We got stragglers in here. Come on, help us out. We want to get to 80. We had 78, 79. We probably just need one more person to chime in here.
Yeah, give us a good solid baseline, audience. Okay, we're at 83%. We're going to end this poll. All right, it looks like 25% said yes, 43 at no, and then 33% are at unclear.
And so, Mitch, there's a couple of things that stand out for me here. The first one, obviously, is that they're not being, a lot of people see them, leaders not being judged on these competencies. So this would be a good thing for those companies to have some type of understanding for. The second thing is that people don't know what people are being evaluated on. And I think that that's a missed opportunity for companies.
Listen, this is such an insightful poll, because what it tells me is that there's a lot of opportunity. And I think that opportunity, especially if you are a D&I practitioner and you're in this audience, or you're just somebody who is, again, concerned about the organizational health of the company you work for, there's to me, a unknown, again, correlation between these things for sure. But then what it also tells me is that, leadership is something that, if you contrast this to what we saw in that opening poll, if leadership is important in developing leadership, leaders are important to organizations. Quite frankly, Reggie, I mean, listen, we need to know what the competencies are. And, again, I would argue that the competencies we just covered, again, are really essential to, leadership in ways that, again, are very connected to people and culture. So I think it just speaks to, a lot of opportunity that may be out there.
Rob puts in the chat that he'd be interested to hear suggestions on how we might suggest that evaluation is scored. He said it's a little intangible, but he likes the concept. I don't know if you, yeah.
I think measurement is probably another conversation, but I could tell Rob, we've had clients, put some different types of questions into their engagement surveys. You might also want to think about, your performance management evaluation strategies. And, a lot of clients maybe do 360 feedback, and, you could get some qualitative kind of answers here. But, this is one of the things, Reggie, and we've had this in other conversations, when it comes to soft skills of people components, right? You could, judge leaders based upon, are they meeting their goals from a sales or revenue perspective? No doubt about it. You can judge leaders based upon, maybe, the production of the folks that they're leading specifically. But this is something, I wouldn't let, the unclarity around measurement get in the way of, again, trying to understand what are the core competencies that are related to leadership, culture, and people, because I think we have many different ways to kind of assess that. It's just really about what does the client prefer, and maybe whether they already doing, and what instruments could, you be currently using that might be useful to measure that as well. But that's a, conversation that definitely should be had as well, because if you're talking about evaluating leaders based upon these things, you want to have a system or instrument in place or metrics in place to do so.
Well, great. Again, that poll was a real important poll. Mitch, you and I talked a lot offline about this whole thing, this whole issue of managers versus leaders. And so I was really happy that you put on the agenda here that we'll actually delve a little bit into this concept of managers versus leaders. So have at it.
Yeah, we've hinted at it a little bit. And quite frankly, Reggie, I had this conversation come up a couple of times in the last couple of months. And, one of my clients is looking to really focus in on leadership development. And what they found is that, they have great technical folks in leadership roles, great clinicians, great people who are really skilled at doing what the organization needs to do to, be a business, make money, right? But organizational health is so much more than that. And I think this, conversation, Reggie, is really about understanding some of the true, characteristics of leadership. That leadership in many ways, right, can be about what we do in terms of, how we add to the bottom line, or, how we lead in, goals, or how we lead in stats and statistics and all those kind of things, or any other technical components. And sort of sometimes we kind of backfill from there and say, well, you do these things well, here's a group of people to lead and manage. Can you do that well? Well, we argue that you don't really manage people, you manage work, and you lead people. And for us, that's about understanding leadership. And that's, three things we'll highlight in today's conversation, Reggie, the first of which is you got to have a really good assessment of the different realities of the stakeholders which you're leading. So you heard us talk about that with connection to some of those core competencies. But the reason this is so important is that, again, just like any good coach, just like any good parent, just like any good anybody, right? You kind of understand the different nuances of the constituents that you're leading. Well, why is that important? Well, if you want to understand how to motivate, something like demonstrating empathy, we want to learn how to be empathetic, right? If you want to learn how to conflict resolution, any of those things, how to inspire, right? Any of those things, I think it starts with a interest and an assessment of the folks that you're leading. If you're not doing that kind of work, there's several ways to get that done, by the way. I think that's the first place that we talk about, again, understanding leadership.
Yeah, you had a couple of comments in the chat, and one of them is I think it's Adeku says that they like that whole concept of manage work, lead people.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because if you're not careful, when you get into managing people, you lose that human element. And people, there's one saying that always stuck with me, Reg. People aren't robots. So people are real people, and you have to deal with that human element. And we do it all the time, every day anyway, right? But if you don't do it in a very intentional way, right? We'll use that word consistently here. I think you're leaving an opportunity here on the board. The next thing connected to leadership, Reggie, is a little bit around power dynamics. We'll talk a lot about power here with leadership. And, there are three elements of power. There's reverent power, there's empowerment, and then there's influence.
And so when you talk about those types of power, is that the only type of power that leaders may have, or those are just the main three you want to touch on here?
Well, reverent power is a type of power. The other two things are kind of byproducts of power. But no, that's not the only different types of power. Reverent power is the aspiration, it's the goal. I'll tell you about that here in a second. But other types of power, let me ask you your question. Some leaders exhibit a coercive power. What do we mean by that? Well, if you don't do what I say do, there's going to be consequence, right? That's coercive power. Other leaders can, exhibit, competence power, right? Which is you have some kind of institutional knowledge, or you know something, therefore you need to listen to me. So if I go to the doctor, right, Reggie, and I sprain my foot, I'm going to listen to that doctor and not you, right? Even though Reggie might sprain his ankle on the basketball court a time or two. Then you might have, positional power, Reggie. So, that's power that people wield by dynamic of deference. So if you think about, being in the military, for example, if I'm a general, I have power by deference and, where my rank is, right? So you can kind of exhibit that. And referent power, Reggie, is, like I said, the aspiration. And that's about power that we gain based upon the trust and respect that we've earned from the people who we're leading.
And you brought up that key thing of trust and respect. So when we talk about trust and respect, how do you gain that though? How do you, I mean, I think that's one of the biggest things that leaders struggle with is how to be like, I have stuff that needs to get done. We got some widgets to make, we got some products to put out there. And how do I find that balance between I need you to do the work, but also that respect?
You know what? You can't go out there and buy it, Reggie. I'll tell you that. It's earned. It's something bestowed upon you by other people based upon the experiences they have with you. So that's why it's important to model inclusion. That's why it's important to embrace difference, to manage privilege. Let me give you a quick analogy, Reggie, because you like sports. Maybe some people out there do. If you don't, forgive me.
Just by the way, since you're going to talk sports, so, you know, my Princeton Tigers made it to Sweet 16. But anyway, go ahead.
I did see that. Mitch Henderson, doing a good job with that program. Yep, they did. I pay attention to people whose name is Mitch, by the way. So Reggie, if you got a person who is, in some a team, right, and they're voted captain of the team, and that captain has some, maybe some power, and it's a very good example of reverent power. And what I mean by earn is a lot of times, unless a coach or players, again, they are usually people who vote on that kind of thing. How does that person, gain that type of power? Well, usually because they've, come to practice day in and day out. They show up early, they leave late. If a teammate is down, they're there to pick them up and they empathize with them. And they're there, again, to provide support in many different ways. So, they have earned that, and people look at them and they give them that trust and respect. And that's why they follow them, right? That's why, again, when we talk about reverent power as a leader, one of the things you want to be a person of integrity, be a person of courage, be somebody who, again, who people look to as a beacon of leadership based upon your actions and your behaviors. And that's what we mean by reverent power.
Leading by example, which is what Carl is saying in the chat. And then talk a little bit about empowerment, because empowerment is a lot different than power.
Yeah. So, you gotta, as leaders, great leaders, take their opportunities and they make the most of them. And I would say, based upon our philosophy, that leaders have a responsibility to empower others. I mean, the culture that you work in, the organizational health of your organizations is dependent upon it. You usually are working with people who have aspirations as well. And, good leaders use their uniquely situated positions to create opportunities and moments for other people to shine and be developed and be better. And I think, that's what empowerment is all about. And we preach that and teach that here at the Kaleidoscope Group. And, really for us is, one of those things that is essential, we think, to inclusion and to healthy and productive environments.
All right. Talk about the leadership mindset, even though you've basically been talking about it generally.
Yeah. Well, also just quickly, that influence piece, again, once you have that power, you influence it and use that power for good. And again, that's, connected to some of the other competencies we've covered. But leadership mindset, lastly here, Reggie, leaders, one of the core things about a leadership mindset, and we'll see some of the contrasts of what we mean by this here in a second. Some of the actual enumerated things, but one of the core principles is just a mindset of I want to develop others, and so I mentioned early on in our conversation that if you're a leader, by nature you're a people person. Now, you don't have to be the same type of leader or people person, have the same type of attributes that I do, right? I might be an extreme extrovert. Somebody might else have a very different personality type. So there are more than multiple ways of characteristics and traits to get this done. But, when you talk about mindset, you really talk about leaving the world and the environment around you a better place than before you got there. And that's leadership mindset. And again, it comes through developing others. It comes through, having integrity and holding yourself accountable. As you said, and somebody else said in the chat, leading by example, modeling inclusion in the behaviors you want to see in other people, and having the ability to sacrifice and work hard, and that's all again wrapped into some of the things that we work on coaching when we talk about, again, developing leaders.
Great. So we have one more poll. I think it's the final poll, Lindsay.
Yep. All right. So our final poll is about describing your organization. So tell us a little bit about what best describes your situation. Your organization does a good job of developing leaders. Your organization does a better job of developing managers, or does your organization doesn't understand the difference between the two?
Oh, I see it moving up and down here, Lindsay. This looks like this is almost like a horse race.
It does.
It's like the little things are moving here and there. Um,
Does.
you know we're at 60%. I know people are probably thinking about this one.
It's a good question. Developing leaders is a very important thing. And we at Kaleidoscope can help you do that. We're excited about the opportunity and everyone learning and growing through this process. All right, we're at 74%.
We're getting close. We're getting close there.
Almost there.
All righty. So we're at we'll end it here
Okay.
actually.
Let's
And
share the results.
and you know the results are actually really mixed. You see almost even, if you will, across. I want to make sure that we get to this whole issue of leading versus managing, Mitch. So not going to make too many comments here. It's just interesting to see what companies, what individuals put down about their companies. But let's talk a little bit about leading versus managing.
Well, both are required, I mean, we want people to be great managers in the sense of managing work and good leaders of people. It'd be helpful if we have a both and, right? But it's really important for people to understand the distinction between the two. So, there's a lot of things out there in the stratosphere. This is one of the things we've cited on the contrast and mindset between the two things. And you can see here, right, looking at this Venn diagram that, again, there are some things that are complementary, right, that both leading and managing is needed to accomplish goal and, again, motivate others maybe, or, accomplish organizational goals, I think is the best way to put it. But leading, again, people focus. You've heard me mention that a lot, right? Charismatic style, to me, that's a way to just say you have an ability to connect and motivate and move, right? I think appealing to the heart, we've talked about, again, empathy. We've talked a lot about being proactive, a lot about being intentional. And, really leaders help raise the expectations. And to me, they help develop environments to make them better off, when they are moved on from that environment. That's what leading is all about.
I like that there's an intersection between the two, that you show that, because a lot of times people might say that they're just totally different, but that there is some intersection. So I'm glad that you showed that here. Our next thing that we really want to talk about is as we look at companies, and we're talking about developing that leadership culture. When we looked at the poll, you could see that some and many of these polls are suggesting that some companies may not be developing that culture. And if they are, the individuals on this call, on this webinar, may not be able to see that.
Yeah. So, I think the last piece of this conversation in developing leadership culture, here's what they should see, right? And here's what people should understand, that one of the things is, okay, you're understanding what leadership is, right? And then we also need to have a conversation about, well, what's my role in leadership, which we've talked about that a little bit, right? But we need to further define that. One of the big things with leaders, and depending on what level you're talking about, but fundamentally, all leaders should be able to do this, is it's very incumbent upon to create these diverse environments, because oftentimes leaders have some kind of influence, right? Remember that we use that word, right? On even things like talent composition. Oh, I don't hire people, right? Well, if you're a leader of the organization, you might set goals, and you might highlight or set strategy for strategic partnerships around recruitment and acquisition. But at a base level, you know, a lot of times we talk about, you know, what does your own personal and professional network look like? And we ask people that because oftentimes we think about, you know, leaders don't think about what the enterprise or what the environment will do. They think about what they can do to the environment and the enterprise. So fundamentally, when you think about something like creating diverse teams, I challenge leaders to think about, hey, if you don't have diversity in your own network, and diversity is defined by, again, whatever you don't have, how do you go about identifying that? What voice that I don't have at my table? How do I go out and get it in an authentic and genuine way? Because as you know, Reggie, when you talk about, you know, things like talent acquisition or hiring, a lot of those things, the opportunity to know about those things and apply to those things come from a lot of times referrals.
That's right.
So how can we expect the enterprise to, you know, resolve something that in a fundamental way, right, we don't do great ourselves?
And that's not saying that there's something wrong with referrals. It's just saying that there is an opportunity that's missed by just using that as your main source.
Yeah. And that is a tangible connection to, again, diversity, right? And representation in our teams and our organizations. It starts with us because oftentimes our clients will come to us and say, hey, we're not as diverse as we want to be, right? How do we tackle that? What do we do? Well, it starts with individuals. It also starts with your leaders. And that's one of the things. I think we've talked about creating fairness and equity for others. We've talked about modeling inclusion. We touched on a little bit about the responsibility to develop others and empower others. And ultimately, again, to positively impact organizational health, to leave our organizations better off than what we found them.
Mitch, obviously this has been we've covered a lot of things here, and I think that Lindsay might have one or two questions before I think from a timing perspective, we're good. We could take maybe one or two questions, Lindsay.
Yeah, I think we might have time for two more. Just want to appreciate everybody's participation today. We've had immense engagement from everybody that joined us today. So thank you so much for that and continuing the conversation. So a good question, and they're all very good, but I want to try and get to them, is can you speak to the difference between calling someone out and calling on someone? How can we address disrespectful behavior and deliver our thoughts in a way that will create the greatest impact?
Yeah.
So it looks like around putting people on the spot, how do we ensure that we're not doing that in a respectful way?
Yeah, great question, Hannah. You know, it's the difference can be summed up as somebody who has, you know, very good, inclusive and respectful communication skills. We oftentimes coach and talk about this, and it's not necessarily about, again, always. So I guess the main thing I would tell this person and you know, and the respond to your question, Hannah, is we coach leaders on how to be effective, not right, but effective. There's a difference between the two. When we feel like we need to be right, we might call somebody out because they were wrong and you need to know that you did this, right? But when you're trying to be effective, what you're going to do is probably call somebody in. And you're going to do so by doing some of the things we alluded to earlier, meaning that feedback is essential. Remember, I said it's critical for us to be better, for you to be better. So it is some merit. I need to give somebody the truth, right? I might need to call out something that was wrong. But if I know my audience and if I choose to do so in a respectful way, right? I think that is the most effective way for us to lead. Now, how can you address, you know, kind of disrespectful behavior, but deliver thoughts in a way that will create the greatest impact? I think it's being more cognizant of that, working on working on the skills and you know, both receiving and giving feedback of the constituents within your organization. And, you know, really, you know, in our coaching and workshops, really putting people through scenarios that allow them to practice that and just really fundamentally and behaviorally speaking, skillfully speaking, things don't necessarily change overnight. But when you pay attention to, you know, calling these things out and really working on these things from a curriculum or kind of learning and development standpoint, I've seen, you know, people come back and say, you know, wow, you know, the way people are operating with each other changes, or the notion of the things that we look for when we bring talent into the organization. these are great questions and kind of scenarios to give people, especially if you're bringing people in a people leading role. Those are just some of the quick thoughts there, but great question.
And we had a comment from Claudia. It just says, I prefer to call others in by not doing it in a public setting and create coaching relationships with them. Just want to make sure I acknowledge that comment. And Lindsay, if we could get one more question, and that would be great.
Yes. So team, let's tell the audience a little bit about how they can partner with Kaleidoscope to develop these competencies and put measurement in place. So tell us a little bit more about the opportunities.
Yeah, and let me shout out Claudia. That was a good response. I think form is also a good, important thing to know, that sometimes, pulling somebody to the side versus, making a point or demonstration in front of other people is something else tactically that's important. But Lindsay, how can they, what can they do? One of the things that we're doing is, again, Lindsay's gonna talk about here about next steps around, again, if this is something that you think is worthwhile, we'd love to start with a kind of an exploratory call to really understand your organization and what you're currently doing with leadership. Quite frankly, a lot of people aren't. What I saw in that poll result is that we don't know what competencies are really connected to leadership. Or specifically, maybe D&I competencies aren't really looked at. Maybe it's all technical things. So we want to assess that and understand that. And then, one of the other things we do to get people kicked off is we have a conversation with the C-suite and executive leaders to really understand and know what they see in their culture, what they see as the benefit of developing leaders, and do they see it as an area of strength or maybe an area of opportunity. We like to have some of these key one-on-one stakeholder interviews to further understand, again, what the needs are. And then we, really help people, in many different ways. But one of the core ways is we develop programming, for leaders. So at the C-suite level, at the middle, quote unquote, middle management level or people leader level. And then also we talk about empowerment from an enterprise level, again, that you don't have to have necessarily a role to necessarily have a leadership mindset or be a leader. So that's a little bit high level of the approach, but certainly it's nuanced. It needs a conversation. We want to understand more about, your specific needs.
I think that really kind of brings us to the end. Lindsay, if you could just reiterate how people can touch base with us, touch base with you if they like to, that'd be fantastic.
Yes, as I mentioned at the beginning of this session, if you're interested in continuing the conversation, learning more about Kaleidoscope, or just generally want to understand more, you can reach out to us directly on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or you can email me directly to have a complimentary 30-minute consultation, if you will, at lindsay.chardelli@kgdiversity.com. And we can talk further. Thank you so much for everyone's time today.
Yes, again, I'd like to thank you guys for joining us. We know that your time is valuable. We hope that this was of some value to you, and hopefully we'll see you again. For the Kaleidoscope Group, I'm Reginald Ponder, that's Mitch Brown, and that was Lindsay Chardelli. Have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.